I'm Courtney, 34 years old, and I thought 8 years of marriage meant something until I woke up alone in a luxury Paris hotel suite. My phone screen showed those 3 words that changed everything number blocked. My millionaire husband Marcus had vanished with our money, our credit cards, everything. The text he'd sent before blocking me still burns in my memory. Stay in France for a while, having real fun without you. I was stranded with nothing. Before I continue this story, tell me where you're watching from today. Hit that like button if you've ever been betrayed, and subscribe because what happened next changed everything about who I thought I was, and you won't believe how I turned his cruel game into my greatest victory. When I first met Marcus 8 years ago at that charity gala in Manhattan, I was 26 and full of dreams. He stood there in his tailored Tom Ford suit, champagne flute in hand, talking about his tech company's latest acquisition. The way he looked at me across that crowded ballroom made me feel like I was the only woman in New York City. He pursued me with the same intensity he pursued his business deals, sending flowers to my cramped Brooklyn apartment every day for a month, each bouquet more extravagant than the last. Our wedding at his family's Hamptons estate was something out of a magazine. 400 guests, a string quartet, lobster flown in from Maine. His mother, Patricia, kissed my cheek and whispered how grateful she was that Marcus had finally found someone who could ground him. I wore my grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing my family had, and Marcus promised he'd buy me 100 more. During our vows, he said I was his partner in everything, that what was his was mine, that we'd build an empire together. Those first years felt like living in a dream I never wanted to wake from. Marcus would come home from his office on Wall Street with surprises weekend trips to Napa, spontaneous flights to Miami just because I mentioned wanting sunshine. He'd sit at our marble kitchen island while I cooked, telling me about his expansion plans, how we'd have houses in 5 countries by the time we were 40. When I showed him my interior design sketches, ideas I'd been developing since art school, he'd kiss my forehead and call them adorable. The shift happened so gradually, I didn't notice the cage being built around me. First, it was him suggesting we combine our bank accounts to make household management easier. Made perfect sense, we were married after all. Then it was him handling all our investments because the financial world was so complex, and he didn't want me to stress about it. When I mentioned starting my own design studio, he laughed, not cruelly, but like I'd suggested something impossibly cute, like a child saying they wanted to be an astronaut. My design studio dreams became dinner party conversation, something Marcus would mention to his colleagues' wives as his little artist wife's hobby. The credit cards in my wallet still had my name on them, but I discovered they were all subsidiary cards under his accounts. He'd review the statements each month, questioning purchases, over $50, not angry, just disappointed if I hadn't consulted him first. My friends started calling less after Marcus would answer my phone, telling them I was busy with household projects. 6 months ago, he came home with champagne and news that would change everything. His company was expanding into European markets, starting with France. He spun me around our living room, describing how we'd spend a month in Paris, while he set up the new office. This was our chance, he said, to reconnect away from New York's pressure. I could study French interior design, visit all the museums I'd dreamed about since college. We'd stay at the Four Seasons George V, the hotel where his business heroes always stayed. I spent weeks preparing for our trip, studying French on my phone app, researching design showrooms in the Marais, booking appointments at fabric suppliers I'd only seen in magazines. Marcus insisted I pack my best evening gowns, the ones he'd bought me for his company galas. He watched me fold each dress into tissue paper, smiling like he knew a secret I didn't. At the airport, he upgraded us to first class without blinking, ordering champagne before we'd even taken off. Paris welcomed us with perfect April weather cherry blossoms floating past our suite windows. Those first 3 days felt like our honeymoon all over again. Marcus held my hand through the Louvre, took photos of me at Versailles, bought me macarons from La Durée every morning. He was the man I'd fallen in love with, attentive and generous, making dinner reservations at restaurants I couldn't pronounce. Between his business calls, which seemed to come more frequently each day, he'd pull me close and tell me how beautiful I looked with the Eiffel Tower lights behind me. On our fourth morning in Paris, everything changed. I woke to find his side of our king-sized bed empty, just a note on his pillow written on hotel stationery. Business meeting with potential investors back tonight. Order whatever you want from room service. The casual tone didn't alarm me. This was why we were here after all, for his European expansion. I spent the day visiting the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, taking hundreds of photos for inspiration, buying French design books with my credit card. That evening I ordered coq au vin from room service, opened a bottle of Bordeaux and waited. Midnight came with no Marcus. My calls went straight to voicemail, but I told myself international business dinners probably ran late here. Maybe his phone had died. I fell asleep in the hotel bathrobe, my makeup still on the dinner cold on its silver tray. The next morning changed everything about my understanding of the man I'd married. Sunlight streamed through those expensive curtains, highlighting the empty space where Marcus's suitcase had been. His toiletries were gone from the bathroom, his clothes missing from the closet. My hands shook as I called his number again. This time, instead of voicemail, I got an automated message that made my blood turn cold. The number you're calling has blocked your calls. I refreshed my phone, thinking it was a mistake, some international calling error. But then the text came through, sent before he'd blocked me, sitting there like a poison dart in my messages. The laughing emojis from his college buddies made it worse. "Stay in France for a while," Marcus had written, "having real fun without you." Jake, his best friend from Harvard, had added crying, laughing faces. Tom wrote savage bro, and Luis just put flame emojis. Like my abandonment was something to celebrate. With trembling fingers, I opened Instagram, and there they were. The four of them on a yacht in Monaco, champagne bottles and models in bikinis. Marcus had his arm around a blonde woman who couldn't have been older than 22. The caption read, "Finally living life without chains." The comments from his friends were all variations of "about time" and "freedom looks good on you." Every mutual friend we had was liking the posts, seeing my humiliation in real time. I stumbled to my laptop, trying to access our joint bank accounts, only to find my login credentials no longer worked. The investment accounts, the savings, even the checking account I used for groceries, all showed access denied when I tried to sign in. My credit cards, those pieces of plastic with my name on them, declined one after another when I tested them on the hotel's website. The only money I could touch was €300 in my wallet cash I'd gotten at the airport for tips. The hotel phone rang, and for a moment I thought it was Marcus calling to say this was all a terrible joke. Instead, the manager's voice, professionally concerned, informed me that Mr. Blackwood had modified the reservation that morning. The room was now only paid through tonight, and they'd need a valid credit card to extend the stay. My voice cracked as I promised to resolve it immediately, though we both knew I was lying. I called James Marcus's business partner, the man who'd been at our wedding, whose daughter I'd helped with her college essays. His secretary put me on hold for 10 minutes before he finally took the call. "Courtney," he said, his voice distant and corporate. "I really can't get involved in personal matters between you and Marcus." He hung up before I could beg. My calls to Marcus's parents went unanswered, until finally Patricia, my mother-in-law, picked up on the 15th ring. "Maybe this will teach you some gratitude," she said, her Connecticut accent sharp as winter ice. "Marcus works so hard, and you've never appreciated what he's given you." The line went dead. The woman who'd called me daughter at Christmas dinner had just told me I deserved to be abandoned in a foreign country. I sat on that luxurious bed, still in yesterday's clothes, the Eiffel Tower mocking me through the window, Room service knocked to collect the tray from last night's uneaten dinner, and I had to pretend everything was fine while my world collapsed. My return ticket wasn't for 2 more weeks, and even if I could get to the airport, I had no money to change the flight. My passport was in the room's safe. At least Marcus hadn't taken that, but it might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did me. My friends back in New York weren't answering their phones either. Later, I'd learn Marcus had called them all telling them I was having a breakdown, that I needed space to find myself in Paris, that they should give me time before reaching out. He'd painted himself as the concerned husband while literally abandoning me. The manipulation was so complete, so carefully orchestrated, that I finally understood this wasn't spontaneous. He'd planned every detail of my humiliation, 24 hours. That's what the hotel gave me to figure out payment before they'd lock me out of the room. I packed my designer clothes into the Louis Vuitton luggage Marcus had gifted me for our 5th anniversary, each piece a reminder of the life I thought I had. The front desk held my bags like collateral, their sympathy barely hidden behind professional smiles. I heard one clerk whisper to another in French, thinking I wouldn't understand, another trophy wife discarded. The hotel concierge who saved me was named Sophie, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. She'd watched the whole drama unfold, seen me go from Marcus Blackwood's pampered wife to abandoned woman in 48 hours. While the manager discussed calling security, Sophie pulled me aside and spoke in hushed English with a thick Parisian accent. "My cousin owns a small hotel in the Marais," she said, pressing a business card into my palm. "It's not the Four Seasons, but he needs help, and you need a room. Tell him Sophie sent you." The address she'd written led me through narrow streets to a 3-star hotel that had seen better decades. The owner, Philippe, looked me up and down, taking in my designer dress and desperate eyes. Sophie had called ahead. He offered me a deal that felt like charity, but was my only option. Clean rooms in exchange for a small room in the staff quarters. That first night in the servants' quarters, I lay on a twin bed that creaked with every breath, staring at water stains on the ceiling. My hands, which had never done harder work than arranging flowers, were already raw from industrial bleach. The other staff members, mostly immigrants from Eastern Europe and North Africa, shared their dinners with me, teaching me survival French between courses of food I couldn't identify but ate gratefully. I scrubbed bathrooms where I'd once dreamed of selecting marble patterns. I changed sheets on beds smaller than my former closet. My back ached constantly, and my designer clothes hung useless in a shared wardrobe while I wore the same 2 uniforms every day. The iPhone I'd barely looked at before became my lifeline, though most of what came through made everything worse. Marcus would unblock me periodically just to twist the knife deeper. Photos from Ibiza private jets to London casino chips in Monte Carlo. His messages were calculated cruelty. "Hope you're enjoying authentic France," he wrote, under a photo of him with 3 models at a club. "Living my best life, thanks for understanding," attached to a video of him popping champagne on a yacht. Then he'd block me again before I could respond, leaving me screaming at a screen that didn't care. His friends joined the torture, tagging me in Instagram stories I couldn't fully see but caught glimpses of through mutual acquaintances. "Where's Courtney?" became a running joke. Marcus would reply publicly, "She wanted to find herself in Paris. Isn't that what all artists do?" The laughing emojis under his comments came from people who'd eaten at our table, who'd called themselves our friends. The narrative was set. I was the unstable wife who'd had a breakdown, and Marcus was the successful husband giving me space to heal. 3 weeks into my new reality, my body had adapted to the physical work, but my mind still couldn't process how completely I'd been erased from my own life. I'd sneak looks at my reflection in the hotel's mirrors, hardly recognizing the woman in the cheap uniform with shadows under her eyes. During my breaks, I'd sketch on napkins, redesigning the tired hotel lobby, imagining what I could do with even €1,000 and some vision. One afternoon, I was cleaning the suite of a guest who'd complained about the room's dated decor when I heard a voice behind me. "You're not really a maid, are you?" The woman speaking was elegant in that effortless French way, probably 70, with perfectly styled white hair and a Chanel suit that cost more than I'd make in a year of cleaning. I turned to find her studying my sketches, the ones I'd left on the desk while changing her linens. Madame Dubois, as she introduced herself, was more than just wealthy. She was one of Paris's most renowned interior designers, with projects from Dubai to New York. She picked up my napkin sketches like they were precious documents, examining each line and annotation. "You have an eye," she said in accented English but no spine. "Why do you clean when you can create?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I told Madame Dubois everything standing there in that hotel suite, with my cleaning supplies at my feet. She listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding as if my story confirmed something she already knew. When I finished, she sat on the freshly made bed and patted the space beside her, ignoring every rule about staff behavior I'd been taught. "Your husband," she said, studying my face, "he thinks he broke you. Instead, he freed you. You just don't know it yet." She pulled out her phone and made a call in rapid French. Within minutes, she'd arranged for me to work evenings, organising her showroom while keeping my cleaning job during the days. The payment she offered for part-time work was more than the hotel paid for full-time cleaning. Her showroom in the 16th arrondissement was everything I'd dreamed of when I'd imagined having my own studio. Fabric samples from Milan, furniture pieces from Danish designers, architectural salvage from chateaux being renovated. She taught me the French luxury market, like a masterclass, introducing me to suppliers who only worked with established designers, showing me how to negotiate in a world where everything had three prices: the tourist price, the local price, and the insider price. "You Americans," she said one evening as we catalogued a shipment of handmade tiles, "you think money is power. But taste, vision, the ability to create beauty from nothing, that's real power. Your husband has money. You have something far more valuable." She pulled out a portfolio of my sketches she'd been collecting, the ones I'd drawn on breaks, and spread them across her antique desk. The small hotel where I worked and lived became my first real project. Philippe, the owner, had been watching me sketch renovation plans during every break. When Madame Dubois vouched for me, he made an offer that seemed impossible. Design the renovation with almost no budget, using only creativity and connections, and he'd give me 20% of any increased revenue for the first year. It was a risk he couldn't really afford, and an opportunity I couldn't refuse. I worked 18-hour days, cleaning in the morning, sourcing materials in the afternoon, painting walls myself at night. The other staff members became my installation crew, helping me move furniture after their shifts ended. We transformed that tired lobby using paint techniques I learned from YouTube Furniture, rescued from estate sales and fabric remnants from Madame Dubois's showroom. The breakfast room became an Instagram dream, with plants propagated from cuttings and vintage mirrors that multiplied the natural light. 6 weeks into my transformation, both personal and professional, I posted before and after photos on my old Instagram account, the one I'd barely used during my marriage. The algorithm, hungry for transformation content, pushed it to thousands of feeds. Design bloggers started sharing it, calling it the ultimate budget renovation. Inquiries poured in from boutique hotels across Europe, all wanting to know who was behind the Phoenix project, the name I'd given my work. Madame Dubois's lawyer friend, a woman who specialized in international family law, reviewed my situation over wine one evening. She pulled up French legal codes on her tablet, showing me statutes I didn't know existed. In France, abandoning a spouse without resources was a criminal offense. Financial abuse was taken seriously here in ways it wasn't in America. We began building a case, documenting everything Marcus had done, every blocked account, every taunting message he'd sent. Through the lawyer's investigator, we discovered the truth about Marcus's supposed European expansion. There was no new office, no international investors. The trip had been funded by embezzling from his own company, taking investor money meant for development, and spending it on his fantasy of single life. The gambling debts he'd accumulated in Monaco alone were more than most people's annual salaries. His company's board had started asking questions, and he was running out of lies to tell them. But the cruelest discovery was about my grandmother's estate. She'd left me $200,000 when she died 3 years ago. Money Marcus had convinced me to let him invest for our future. That money, my only inheritance, had been liquidated 6 months ago, right when he started planning this trip. The France abandonment wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. He needed me broken and desperate, so I'd sign whatever divorce papers he eventually sent. Marcus had miscalculated one fundamental thing. He thought humiliation would destroy me, that being forced to clean toilets and beg for food would make me compliant. He thought I was the same 26-year-old girl who'd been dazzled by his wealth and confidence. But every floor I scrubbed had taught me I could survive anything. Every night in that tiny room had shown me I didn't need luxury to exist. Every sketch I drew proved my creativity didn't depend on his permission. Madame Dubois introduced me to investors at a dinner party in her Saint-Germain apartment. These weren't just wealthy people, they were individuals who understood design, who valued creativity over conformity. By the end of the evening, I had handshake agreements for 3 hotel renovations and 1 restaurant redesign. The contracts, when formalized, would pay me more than Marcus had ever allowed me to dream of earning. Phoenix Interiors was officially registered as a French business entity 2 months after Marcus had abandoned me. The name wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. Rising from ashes was exactly what I was doing. My first major client, a boutique hotel chain with 5 properties across Europe, signed a €2 million contract. The girl who'd begged for €300 now had a business account with 6 figures. I hired young designers who'd been rejected by traditional firms for being too bold, too different. Our studio was a converted warehouse space that Madame Dubois helped me negotiate, paying a quarter of market rate because the owner believed in second chances. We worked on sawhorses and salvaged tables, but our ideas were worth millions. Each project we completed generated 3 more inquiries. The design world, always hungry for the next story, embraced the narrative of the abandoned wife who built an empire. 3 months and 17 days after Marcus left me stranded, I booked my flight home. First class on Air France, paid for, with my own credit card from my own business account. The boutique I'd once window shopped in Saint-Honoré now knew me by name, and I'd rebuilt my wardrobe with clothes that I chose, not costumes Marcus had selected for me to wear. My French lawyer had prepared everything, working with a New York firm that specialized in high net worth divorces. The investigation into Marcus's embezzlement had progressed faster than expected. The FBI had gotten involved when they discovered he'd moved money across state lines and internationally. His assets were frozen by court order, his passport confiscated. The man who'd traveled the world to humiliate me was now trapped in Manhattan, wearing an ankle monitor that tracked his every movement. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew our story. His parents, Patricia and William Blackwood, had hired the best lawyers money could buy, but even they couldn't spin the evidence. Marcus had stolen from his investors, defrauded his business partners, and committed financial abuse across international borders. The prenuptial agreement he'd insisted I sign, the one meant to protect his wealth, now protected mine. Since Phoenix Interiors was established after our separation and funded entirely without marital assets, he couldn't touch a cent. I landed at JFK on a Thursday morning, the same day of the week he'd abandoned me. My lawyer, Catherine Chen, met me at arrivals with a smile that promised vindication. She'd arranged for movers to pack Marcus's belongings from our penthouse, now legally mine since it had been purchased with my grandmother's money, a detail Marcus had forgotten when forging my signature on the papers. He'd been living there alone since returning from Europe, but a court order gave him 48 hours to vacate. The confrontation I'd imagined so many times happened in what used to be our living room. Marcus stood among boxes of his possessions, his face gaunt from stress, his designer clothes hanging loose on a frame that had lost its gym-perfected physique. When he saw me, his eyes went through a series of calculations, trying to decide which manipulation might still work. "You can't leave me," he said, his voice missing its usual commanding tone. "I made you. Everything you have is because of me." The words might have hurt 3 months ago, back when I still believed his version of our story. Now they just sounded pathetic, the last gasps of a drowning man who didn't realize the water was his own doing. My response came out calmer than I'd practiced. "You didn't make me Marcus. You tried to break me. There's a significant difference." I handed him the divorce papers myself, wanting to see his face when he read the terms. Full financial disclosure of all hidden assets, repayment of my inheritance with interest, and a settlement that reflected the criminal charges he was facing. His signature would be an admission of guilt that would help the prosecutors. The security footage I'd obtained through my lawyer showed him entering my grandmother's safe deposit box with a key he'd stolen from my jewellery box. The jewellery she'd left me pieces that had been in our family for generations he'd sold to fund his gambling. Each piece was documented, photographed, and now evidence in both our divorce and his criminal trial. His parents, sitting in their Hamptons estate, called my lawyer begging for mercy. Their son had destroyed their family name and fortune. Patricia Blackwood, the woman who'd told me to be grateful while I was abandoned, came to my new office in person. Phoenix Interiors had taken over 2 floors of a building in Tribeca with views of the Hudson and a client list that read like Architectural Digest's masthead. She sat in my reception area for 3 hours before I agreed to see her, her Hermes bag, worth more than most annual salaries, clutched in her lap like armor. "Please," she said, actual tears ruining her perfect makeup, "don't let them send him to prison. He's still my son." I looked at this woman who'd raised a man who thought women were property, who'd enabled his cruelty by calling it ambition. My answer was simple. He's going to prison because of what he did, not because of what I'm doing. I'm just refusing to lie to save him anymore. The trial moved quickly once Marcus realized his former friends were testifying against him to save themselves. Jake, Tom, and Luis had all been involved in various schemes, but they were small fish compared to Marcus. They took plea deals that required full cooperation. Their testimony painted a picture of a man who'd been planning to leave me for over a year, who'd laughed about how stupid I was to trust him, who'd called me his retirement plan because of my grandmother's money. Marcus was sentenced to 5 years minimum in federal prison for embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion. The abandonment in France added international charges that would follow him even after his release. The moment the gavel fell, I felt something release in my chest, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. It wasn't joy or revenge, just relief that the truth had finally been acknowledged in a court of law. Phoenix Interiors was featured on the cover of 3 major design magazines the month Marcus reported to prison. The articles focused on the work, not the scandal, though everyone in the industry knew the story. My team had grown to 50 employees across offices in New York, Paris, and London. We specialized in transforming spaces that others had written off, bringing beauty to places that had been abandoned, much like I'd been. The scholarship fund I established for women recovering from financial abuse had its first graduating class. 20 women who'd been left with nothing by partners who'd controlled their finances were now certified interior designers with job placements at firms around the world. Each of them had a story like mine, but worse. Some had children to feed while rebuilding. Some had been left in poverty while their exes lived in luxury. All of them were phoenixes rising from ashes they didn't deserve to be burned by. I bought a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights with cash from a single project, a hotel renovation in Switzerland. that had become my signature work. The house had been abandoned for years, left to decay by owners who'd forgotten its value. I restored it myself, every tile and fixture chosen by my hands, every room a testament to the idea that abandoned doesn't mean worthless. The morning I moved in, I found a package on my doorstep with no return address. Inside was my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one I'd worn at my wedding, returned by someone who'd bought it from Marcus and learned its history. The healing wasn't linear or pretty. Even with professional success beyond my dreams, even with Marcus in prison and my name cleared of any association with his crimes, the trauma lived in my body like an unwelcome guest. I'd wake up at 3 a.m, heart racing, convinced I was back in that hotel room discovering his departure. Therapy helped twice a week with someone who specialized in financial abuse survivors. Dr. Sarah Martinez had seen hundreds of women like me, successful and intelligent people, who'd been slowly conditioned to accept the unacceptable. She helped me understand that Marcus had never loved me, that people like him weren't capable of love in the way healthy people understood it. He'd seen me as an asset, a beautiful acquisition that came with a respectable family name and an inheritance he could steal. The red flags had been there from the beginning, hidden under grand gestures and love bombing that felt like romance but was actually control. I started recognizing the warning signs I'd missed or explained away, how he'd isolated me from friends by being charming but always available, making me feel guilty for choosing anyone else's company over his, how he'd framed financial control as protection, making me feel incapable rather than imprisoned. How he'd weaponized generosity, giving me things I hadn't asked for, then using them as evidence of my greed when I questioned anything. Building genuine friendships with other women entrepreneurs became my salvation. We met monthly in each other's offices or homes, sharing victories and defeats without judgment. These women had built empires from nothing, survived betrayals and bankruptcies, raised children while raising capital. They didn't see my story as shameful, but as survivorship. They introduced me to their networks, recommended me for projects, and celebrated every victory like it was their own. Romance wasn't even a consideration for the first year. I needed to learn who Courtney was, without Marcus's definition, without anyone's definition but my own. I took myself on dates to museums and concerts, bought myself flowers every Friday, cooked elaborate meals for one in my restored kitchen. The relationship I was building with myself required the same attention and intention as any romance, maybe more. When attraction did stir again, it was for a completely different kind of person. The architect collaborating on our Miami hotel project was nothing like Marcus. David was quiet, where Marcus had been loud, collaborative, where Marcus had been commanding. He asked for my opinion and actually listened to the answer. He had his own success that didn't require diminishing mine, but I wasn't ready, might never be ready to give someone else that kind of power over my life again. Phoenix Interiors went public on the 3rd anniversary of my abandonment in Paris. The IPO valued the company at $200 million. I retained controlling interest. My team got stock options that made millionaires out of people who'd believed in a woman with nothing but talent and determination. The financial press called it the comeback story of the decade. I called it proof that the best revenge isn't living well, it's living authentically. The documentary Netflix produced about financial abuse featured my story prominently, though I'd initially resisted participating. But when I learned how many women were trapped because they didn't know escape was possible, I agreed to tell everything. The film showed the hotel where I'd cleaned rooms, interviewed Sophie, who'd saved me with her kindness, featured Madame Dubois, explaining how talent transcends circumstances. They even got footage of Marcus being arrested, his face a study in disbelief that consequences had finally found him. Speaking at conferences became part of my mission. I'd stand in front of hundreds of people and tell them about scrubbing toilets in Paris, about crying myself to sleep on a servant's cot, about rebuilding from absolute zero. The questions were always the same. How did you find the strength? How did you not give up? How did you forgive yourself for not seeing it sooner? My answers were always honest. Strength came from having no other choice. Not giving up was literally about survival, and forgiveness was an ongoing process I worked on every single day. The book I published, Financial Freedom After Abuse, a Phoenix Rising Guide, became required reading at several law schools and social work programs. Every chapter contained practical advice, mixed with personal narrative: how to recognize financial abuse before it's too late, how to document everything even when you think you're crazy, how to rebuild credit, find resources, believe in your own worth when someone has spent years convincing you that you have none. Marcus was released after serving 3 years with good behavior, but his life was nothing like before. His professional licenses were revoked, his reputation destroyed beyond repair. He moved back to his parents' Connecticut estate, but even they kept their distance. The trust fund he'd always fallen back on was depleted from legal fees and settlements. The last I heard, he was working at a car dealership in New Jersey, the kind of place that didn't Google their employees. His former friends all moved on with their lives, pretending they'd never known him well. Jake married money and moved to Singapore. Tom joined a monastery, seeking redemption for various sins. Luis disappeared entirely, rumors placing him everywhere from Dubai to Detroit. None of them ever apologized to me, but their silence said everything. They'd chosen their side and lost. I'd been forced onto my own side and won. The women I helped through the Phoenix Foundation weren't all success stories. Some went back to their abusers, unable to break the psychological chains even when the financial ones were severed. Some struggled with addiction or mental health crises that money couldn't solve. But for everyone who made it out and rebuilt, there were 10 more who saw it was possible. The foundation provided emergency housing, legal assistance, job training, and most importantly, belief that leaving was survivable. One woman, Jennifer, had been left by her husband in a situation eerily similar to mine, except she had 3 children and no Madame Dubois to save her. The foundation got her family back to America, found her housing and childcare, and funded her coding boot camp. 2 years later, she was making 6 figures at a tech company. Her eldest daughter wrote me a letter saying I'd saved her mother's life. I kept that letter in my desk drawer, reading it whenever I questioned whether success meant anything. 5 years have passed since that morning in Paris, when I woke to find myself abandoned. 5 years of rebuilding, growing, becoming someone I actually recognize in the mirror. Phoenix Interiors operates in 12 countries now, with a reputation for transforming forgotten spaces into extraordinary places. My team jokes that we specialize in resurrection, bringing dead buildings back to life, but they know it's more than a business model. It's a philosophy born from my own resurrection. I bought the small hotel in the Marais, where I'd scrubbed floors, renovating it into a boutique property that celebrates its working-class history while embracing modern luxury. Philippe still runs it now as a partner rather than an owner. The servants' quarters, where I'd cried myself to sleep, became a museum-quality preservation of immigrant worker housing, reminding guests that beauty often rises from struggle. Sophie, the concierge who'd saved me, cuts the ribbon at the reopening. Madame Dubois, now 80 and still impeccably dressed, called it my masterpiece. The Hamptons estate, where I'd married Marcus, went into foreclosure after his parents lost everything trying to save him. I bought it at auction for a fraction of its value, turning it into a retreat centre for financial abuse survivors, where 400 wedding guests had once toasted my doomed marriage women now gather to rebuild their lives. The ballroom where I'd danced in my grandmother's pearls became a workspace where survivors learn new skills. The irony is so perfect it feels like fiction, but it's real, all of it. Marcus sent me a letter last month forwarded through my lawyer since direct contact would violate his parole. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to ask for forgiveness he'd never earn. I read it once, then fed it to the fireplace in my Brooklyn brownstone, watching his words turn to ash like everything else about our marriage. The woman who might have needed his apology died in that Paris hotel room. The woman I am now doesn't need anything from him, not even acknowledgement of what he did. My mother, who'd been too sick to help during the crisis, lived to see my success. She spent her last months in my guest room, proud of the daughter who'd survived what would have destroyed most people. Before she died, she told me my grandmother would have been proud too, that the women in our family had always been phoenixes rising from whatever tried to burn them. She was right. The inheritance Marcus stole was just money. The real inheritance was resilience I didn't know I had. Romance found me when I stopped looking for it. Not David the architect, but someone unexpected. Marie-Claire, the French lawyer who'd helped build my case, moved to New York for completely unrelated reasons. We met for coffee to discuss foundation legal work and discovered conversation that lasted 6 hours. She understood survival and success, having built her own practice after her family disowned her for loving women. We took it slow, both of us too scarred to rush toward anything that might become a cage. The speaking engagements continue, though now I'm selective about which stories need to be heard. Last week, I spoke at Harvard Business School in the same auditorium where Marcus had given a talk about entrepreneurship years ago. The professor introducing me mentioned this coincidence, not knowing the full story. I told those eager MBA students that real entrepreneurship isn't about taking risks with other people's money. It's about risking everything on yourself when you have no other choice. My story has been optioned for a feature film, though I insisted on creative control. Too many survival stories get turned into revenge fantasies or romantic comedies where the woman needs another man to save her. My story isn't about revenge or romance. It's about the radical act of saving yourself when the person who promised to protect you becomes the danger you need protection from. It's about learning that rock bottom has a basement, but also that you can build an empire from underground. The Phoenix Foundation just opened its 10th shelter, this one in Los Angeles, where the need is hidden behind Hollywood glamour. Each shelter is designed with the same attention to beauty as my luxury projects. These women have been told they deserve nothing. The least we can do is give them something beautiful while they rebuild. Every room has original art donated by artists who understand that environment affects recovery. Every common space is designed to inspire possibility, not just provide necessity. Sometimes I dream about that morning in Paris, but the dreams have changed. Instead of panic and abandonment, I dream about the moment I decided to survive. Instead of Marcus's cruelty, I dream about Sophie's kindness. Instead of loss, I dream about all the women who've contacted me saying my story gave them courage to leave. The nightmares have been replaced by something more powerful than fear or anger. They've been replaced by purpose. The empire I've built isn't about money, though the money is substantial and satisfying. It's about proving that abandonment isn't the end of anyone's story. It's about showing that the person who breaks you doesn't get to define your breaking or your rebuilding. It's about demonstrating that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing you ever do. When young women ask me for advice, I tell them to build their own credit, keep their own accounts, maintain their own friendships, and never let anyone convince them that independence is selfishness. I tell them that love shouldn't require surrendering your autonomy, that partnership doesn't mean giving someone else control over your survival. I tell them that if someone shows them who they should believe it the first time, not the 100th. But mostly, I tell them about a morning in Paris, when I thought my life was over, when everything I'd built my identity on was stripped away in a single cruel gesture. I tell them how that moment, the one meant to destroy me, became the moment I discovered I was indestructible. Not because I was strong, but because I chose to be. Not because I had help, though help came, but because I helped myself first. Marcus thought he left me powerless in France, but he actually left me right where I needed to be to become the woman I was always meant to become. And for that, I almost want to thank him. Almost. The truth is, I don't think about him much anymore. He's a footnote in my story, not the main chapter he believed himself to be. When I stand in my office overlooking Manhattan, when I walk through properties, I'm transforming. When I hold women who've just escaped their own abandonment, Marcus doesn't exist. He's less than a ghost. He's an absence that created space for something magnificent to grow. My story isn't unique, which is both heartbreaking and hopeful. Millions of women have been financially abused, abandoned, discarded, when they stopped being convenient. But if I could rise from those ashes, if I could build phoenix interiors from a servant's cot in Paris, if I could transform humiliation into an empire, then so can they. So can you, if you're watching this and seeing yourself in my story. I want to leave you with this truth that took me years to understand. The person who abandons you isn't taking anything away. They're revealing what was always yours to claim. Your strength, your creativity, your resilience, your power. These things can't be given or taken by anyone else. They can only be recognized or ignored. And once you recognize them, once you claim them, no one can ever take them away again. That morning in Paris, I thought I'd lost everything. I'd actually just begun to find it all. If my story resonated with you, if you've survived your own abandonment, or if you're still in survival mode, I want to hear from you in the comments. Share your own phoenix moment, the time you rose from ashes someone else created. Like this video if you believe in the power of comeback stories, and subscribe to hear more about how we're transforming pain into power through the Phoenix Foundation. Share this with anyone who needs to know that abandonment is not the end, it's a beginning in disguise. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find your own wings in whatever ashes you're rising from. And remember, the best revenge isn't living well, it's living free.